Okay, this is Ryan with Employment Boost Resume Writing. Happy to be here and share some best practices and advice on the modern job search. Uh, Obviously, with the events that have been happening on a national and global scale, the job market has been affected greatly. And so, reported claims of more joblessness and just in general, more companies are looking for or more people are looking for jobs and have a lot of businesses are on standstill. Uh, don't fret. We do have some tips on how to navigate that job market and how to make the most of the opportunity that's out there. So we'll wait a couple minutes for a few more viewers to come in, but excited to share this content with you. Okay, we'll get started on the slideshow here. So just a little bit about us. Employment Boost. We are a company that's a part of a larger holdings brand. We are full service outplacement, career coaching, resume writing, and while our headquarters are out of Troy, Michigan, we have other offices across the country in the United States, including Denver, Cleveland, Chicago, New York City. And not only do we serve individual consumers who are interested in our services, but we also help businesses as well, whom are looking to potentially transition employees out of their organization. And so we have had an increased demand from businesses just trying to help out their employees during this time. But we've also still seen quite a few people who are trying to improve their marketability on the search, and whether it's resume writing, coaching, or LinkedIn profile development, all of those tools are still necessary, maybe now more than ever, uh, to help you move into the next step in your career. Our team in general, while it's primarily made up of certified resume writers, we're also supported by market analysts, recruiters, career coaches who all come together in order to provide the best insights on the job market as possible. I mentioned earlier we're a part of a larger holdings organization, Heavy Hitter Holdings, multiple human capital consulting, recruiting, and career services brands under this company. Life Science Search Partners, J Phillip Executive Search, Clark Kniff. Those are all recruiting firms whom we lean on pretty heavily just to get a pulse on what the market is looking for their for content keywords, job search strategies, and what terms need to be on resumes, and really where one should look for a job. They're calling thousands of candidates on a daily basis, and so they help give our team insights as to how we can market our clients a lot more effectively. Today, we're going to cover a few different things. First, we're going to break down how a resume should look in today's job market. We'll go over some tips and mistakes to avoid on the resume. There's a lot of bad trends out there that we'll talk about and recommend avoiding. And then we'll also have job search tips and techniques, how to enhance your professional skill set, which during this time is going to be more important than it even usually is. And then interviewing best practices as well. When you do get to the interview and you do get to a point where you're sitting in front of a hiring professional, how can you sell yourself as well as possible? So we're going to cover all of that today. Our team, it's made up of, or in terms of who is reading your resume, uh, the first thing that reads it is an applicant tracking system. So, in today's day and age where companies are so reliant on technology and sorting through candidates, it's very easy to apply to jobs. You can use multiple websites like CareerBuilder, LinkedIn, Indeed, and feasibly apply to several jobs in an hour. Companies need this technology to sort through candidates and determine where they should spend their time on the job search, or where they should spend their time making calls for potential candidates. It's not possible for a recruiter to call every single candidate, so these systems are vital for organizations when it comes to sorting through talent. Uh, the nice thing about applicant tracking systems is that if you know how they work, they can be a serious benefit for your application. If your keywords are matched up to the description in the job posting, it's going to go a long way in making sure that your resume and your profile gets viewed so that hiring professionals can see the document and see your qualifications for the position. Um, so that said, the applicant tracking systems check it out first, but it's also viewed by other professionals. It's looked at by talent acquisition specialists, supervisors, human resources managers. All those people got to see the resume before an offer is presented or before an interview is scheduled more often than not. And the main goal and the main takeaway here is that you're not really writing your resume for yourself. You're writing your resumes for someone else, and you're writing your resume to appease these other people so that you can show your best qualifications for the position. Uh, on applicant tracking systems, I touched on earlier, it's an electronic database that stores resumes. I'm sure everyone has heard of LinkedIn. Technically, LinkedIn is an applicant tracking system. It has the same algorithms and it works the same way as any other resume kind of database, such as CareerBuilder, The Ladders, Indeed, Monster. They all work the same way. And how do they sort these resumes, and what makes one resume ranked number one, number two, number three in the pool of candidates for a position? It comes down to the frequency, placement, and boldness of certain keyword terms on a resume. So, for example, if I was a recruiter and I had a job posting out there for we can say a IT project manager, and they really needed to know agile methodology, for example, I would type that term into the database, and the resume database, the applicant tracking system, would sort those positions based on their compatibility to that keyword term. And so if you had agile methodology in the resume several times and it was high up on the document and bolded, there's a very good chance your document's going to be ranked well, and a very good chance that your resume is going to be one of the first ones that are read. And so this is going to be a very important thing to keep in mind when you're going on the job search, is identifying what skills are vital to the position, what skills you could bring to the table so that you could showcase them. And we can talk about that a little bit further. The next thing that applicant tracking systems are scanning, location. There's a conception out there that I don't want to have my full address on the resume, or I don't feel comfortable having that on there. At the very minimum, we always say you should at least include the city, the state, and the zip code if possible. Reason being is that if the recruiter is looking for a candidate within 30 miles of a certain city for a job posting, and you don't have any address on your resume, you're not going to pop up in that search. This could be a strategic tool for your job search as well. We've had clients who want to relocate to a city maybe across the U.S., and they're coming across competition, local competition, that is making sure that their resume never really gets viewed. We might recommend putting a family or friend's address or a PO box or something to where your resume at least pops up in the database so you can have that initial conversation with the recruiter. and say, hey, I'm willing to relocate myself. I want to go for this position. I want to be in this location. And this was the only way I could get my information to be viewed. So it's all about starting that initial conversation with the talent acquisition team. Uh, Applicant tracking systems, they're also looking at education. They'll parse out bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, and they're able to figure that out on the resume as well. Because if education is a hard requirement for the job, that's also they'll rule out resumes and candidates who might not have that on the document. So that's another way they're saving recruiters time. And then certifications, similar to education, if you need to have your PMP certification, for instance, and you don't have it on the document and it's a hard requirement for the job, your resume is not going to pop up in that search. So you'll want to keep that in mind when you're going through job postings and tweaking your resume for each position. And again, I do want to reiterate that hiring in general and the way that technology has been like intertwined with it is that you're not really writing for people as much as you're writing for a system and a job posting. A resume is not so much a piece of creative writing as much as it is a technical piece of marketing collateral. And that's just how the market has gone in the digital age of job searching. And then the last thing, stemming off of that point, is that you don't always want to have the prettiest resume or the best looking from a picture or image standpoint. Oftentimes, these images do not cooperate with applicant tracking systems, and so there are exceptions to every rule. But usually, if you're in a creative field, those positions will demand that you have a portfolio where you can show off some of your more creative work. It's not really ideal for being on the resume because of these applicant tracking systems. And if you have a table that shows your skills or any other kind of images, that's not going to be picked up by the tracking system. So we always advise against it. Here's an outline of a industry standard resume. It's something that we've had a lot of success with in writing for different clients over the years. And you'll notice on there that it needs to be a visually efficient document. Recruiters, more often than not, they're not going to be reading every single word on the resume. And so you need to make good use of your page space. You need to make good use of the real estate that's on there. From the tests that we've run over the years and our feedback from hiring professionals is that you really want to keep it, especially if you're in the private sector, you really want to keep it 1 to 2 pages, and you'll want to keep it about 400 words per page. I talk to several candidates on a daily basis who may or may not be on the job market, or people who are trying to enhance their resume, and they always tell me I've spoken with some recruiters and they only want to see a 1-page resume. That's probably the most common thing I hear. From what we found over the years is that that's not a completely factual rule, and I can explain why. It's because you have to consider what the demands of the position are. If you are fresh out of college, or you have maybe 1 to 5 years of experience, a couple companies that you've worked at, and the position that you're going for and applying for demands that kind of experience, odds are you don't need a second page on the resume, and your competition is not going to have a second page either. If you are a senior manager at an organization, or you're director level, and you have 10, 15, 20, 25 years of experience, your competition, more likely than not, is going to have a 2-page resume, because the hiring managers for those teams are going to want to see that career progression, and they're going to want to see how you got to where you are as a strategic executive or a strategic decision maker. And so what I'll tell people is, obviously brevity is good, and a 1-page resume is nice, but at the same time, your competition is going to be having more content to market themselves with, and you could be really limiting the accomplishments that you've had over the years. So we say, if it makes sense, let's do 2 pages, and we can expound on how you got to be where you were in your career. And then we always, just to reiterate, colors, text boxes, tables, and graphics. Uh, we advise against these things, usually from a usability standpoint on the resume. Text boxes, tables, they're difficult to format around. Graphics, same thing. They also don't cooperate with the applicant tracking systems either. And then colors, we've gotten some mixed feedback on colors from ATS systems. And then from a human standpoint as well, again, going back to that idea of you're not writing the resume for you, you have to create a document that lets the content speak for itself. And we have heard this before, as ridiculous as it sounds, but let's say you are a Michigan State graduate and you have green on the resume, and the hiring professional is a U of M graduate, and they don't like green, for example. Uh, Sometimes, humans are discriminatory. That can cause your resume to go in the rejection pile. It sounds silly and it sounds nitpicky, but when you're marketing yourself and you're trying to put your best foot forward, you don't want any distractions, any possible ways a hiring professional can discriminate against you to set you back from reaching your dream job or your ideal opportunity. So uh, it looks clean. It can be stylish as long as it's not distracting, and as long as it's not going to cause someone to put your application in the rejection pile. We'll start looking at the summary. Recruiters, when they're going through their day to day, very good chance that the position you're applying for is not the only job that they're recruiting for. They have call metrics to make, they have multiple positions, several interviews to coordinate. So just like they don't have time to call everyone, they certainly don't have time to read every resume word for word. Our data, we found that they really only take about 8 to 12 seconds on the document to review the resume. So one of the things that we have found that recruiters will read word for word is the summary. And the summary is my personal favorite part of the document because it allows you to be the most creative, and it allows you to put in keyword terms that are going to position yourself better in the database, but it also allows you to brand yourself, and it also sets the stage. And mind you, this is not an objective statement. This is a summary to where you can say, hey, I'm coming off the page for this specific job that I'm applying for. If you're going for a sales associate position, your summary, it shouldn't really be talking about your project management skills, and it shouldn't really be talking about your management or engineering abilities, even if you do have them. Remember, we're trying to be as specific as possible because from a content, keywords, and branding standpoint, it's going to be very important that the hiring professional says, I need sales out of my sales associate, and that's what this person brings to the table. So you can play with it a little bit. We use the job title on this example here, Senior IT Project Manager, but maybe if they're going for an IT job that they're qualified for, that's not project management, you could say Senior IT Professional, or if you want to be project management but no longer in IT, you can say project management professional. So you can kind of tweak it a bit and make sure that it's optimized for the position you're going for. That said, still 8 to 12 seconds, so you want to keep it fairly succinct. We always recommend 3 to 4 sentences when you're coming up with this branding statement. I make a comparison to an elevator pitch. It's almost like a textual elevator pitch, short, sweet, and it should be flexible depending on the situation that you're applying for, the job that you're applying for. Moving into the content, you'll want to make sure that the bullet points are big wins. You'll want to make sure that they are highlights of your career versus standard day-to-day job duties. When we do resume evaluations, it's a complimentary service that our team provides. We'll do scorecards on the document. This is usually the biggest thing we find is that resumes read a lot of times like a job description when they really when they really shouldn't. The job description, it's showing you the standard day to day of what you're going to be doing in the role, but there's no way of saying what would make one candidate better than another when your resume just lists your duties. You have to think a job search and an application process is a competition. So if you're going up against another sales manager, for example, and the sales manager on their resume says, "Hey, I call on clients, maintain accounts, and provide customer service," uh, but your resume says brought in $2.3 million worth of revenue by managing a book of business over 20 clients, ensuring proper customer service and continuous follow through. Um, I'm kind of paraphrasing there, but you get the idea that as a candidate, the second option sounds a lot better. You want to call that person first because they're giving an indication that they've had more success in the position. Um, you can take this example, for instance. Um, there's a good chance that the recruiter or uh, the talent acquisition professional, whoever is going to be reading the document, is not really going to be a technical expert on the job. So you have to spell out the value of each position. So if you could put quantitative metrics in there saying, hey, I did improve the infrastructure to support 100,000 transactions, or if you could say, hey, I did receive recognition for optimizing different processes, that just sells it better, and it's simpler to where, remember, it works for the applicant tracking system, it works for the first person reading it, now the recruiter or the hiring screener, and they can pass that on to the hiring manager, say, hey, this person's an excellent candidate because they've had success in the position. So all this happens when you're creating strong content at the start, making it a strong bullet point, a verb that begins it, and it really sets the tone for your resume that you're not so much a professional as much as it is you're a success in each position that you've had. And that being said, you'll want, back to the branding point, you will want to have a smooth and linear and well formatted resume throughout. You'll want timelines of different positions to be accounted for. You'll want to explain if you have the months on one position and the years on another, you'll want that to match up. Whatever route you do take. For when we write resumes, we usually write the months and the years, for example. So this is a piece of marketing collateral, and it's a document that you're presenting to people. You'll want to make sure it looks good and is a nice cohesive document. I had mentioned before about the address on the resume and applicant tracking system sorting through and filtering candidates based on their location. This also comes into play with regards to the locations of the positions. So, for example, let's say you're someone who really doesn't mind commuting an hour each way to work every day or even more. And the address on your resume shows that you were doing that, and you're going for a position in a similar city than your previous job. The person reading the resume says, hey, this person's used to working in Atlanta. Our job's in Atlanta. Even though they're pretty far outside the city, they're okay with coming in. So that's why we always recommend putting the cities into the document as well. That extra detail is going to help you in the long run. And then you can tell too, I mentioned that we want to avoid colors. We want to have a consistent font throughout the document. With this format, when we're trying to distinguish between a company name, a city, a title, in the years, you can play with it with having italics and bold fonts, different sizes, to where it still looks professional, but you can tell what's what, and it's very easy to read and understand. And then going down on the resume, education formalities, you got to think about where you put the education on the document. So the case for most entry-level professionals we've worked with, and backgrounds and candidate profiles we've seen for entry level, is that more often than not, the college education or the bachelor's degree in the program that you come from are going to be the most marketable aspect of your background. A lot of times we'll have kids from college who worked in the cafeteria, had a part-time job, but they just got their degree. Um, their degree should be high up on the resume. Again, this is a piece of marketable content. If a degree is a requirement for the job and that's the best thing you're bringing to the table, your resume should look like summary and then keyword section and then your degree, your education, and then your professional experience, because the degree in most cases for that particular instance is going to be the most relevant requirement for the position. If you're a CEO, on the other hand, and you have 15, 20 years of industry experience, your education should be on the bottom of the document. And we'll go into details you should include about the education in later slides, but over time, the piece of marketing collateral that is the resume should be updated and should be constantly tweaked to present the best information possible regarding your experiences as in your background. So over time, the education is going to become less and less important as you accrue experience. And then outside of education, we like to couple it with different certifications and different proficiencies as well. The certification project management professional, for example, you're going to want to have it in the resume. I would also recommend getting it higher up in the document as well, whether it's in the content or the summary of the resume. It's a very commonly searched term for recruiters because it's such a hard requirement for a lot of different jobs. So here's an example. This is a very accomplished entry-level candidate we've worked with this resume, and they didn't have a lot of experience outside of their education. And so we have that they were on the dean's list, and some of their coursework, data security, algorithms, computer security, and advanced computer security. So these are terms that recruiters are typing in as hard requirements for a position. For all of our college graduates whom have an interest in a job that's in their desired major that they graduated with, but they don't have experience in that field, we always advise on using coursework as a way of making the resume optimized for that position. You always hear, how do I get experience without having experience, or how do I get my resume to be seen if I haven't worked in that job before? Your coursework is the most relevant thing to that job. Go ahead and put it on the resume, because odds are it is a term that is going to be researched by a recruiter. And if it is an entry-level position that has that keyword term as a requirement, there's a chance they're going to see it and they're going to give you a call. And so it's a strategy to get around that, is when you don't have the experience required to get the experience you want, you may have to look for other alternatives like coursework or different kinds of projects, or even extracurricular activities that have that experience in it. And we'll talk about that later in the slideshow as well when we cover professional development. Common resume mistakes. In our industry, there's a lot of bad advice out there, unfortunately. There's some instances where people will still have an objective statement on a resume saying, hey, I want to join an organization where I'm enhancing my customer service ability and can have growth potential. Or something similarly ambiguous. I want to join a company where I could be a part of a team and contribute to the company's growth trajectory. While objective statements were more, I would say, more looked at and analyzed 10 to 15 years ago, they're not as effective in today's job market. Again, the job market and the candidates in it have become more and more competitive and more abundant. And so instead of saying something you want to do, which is an objective statement. I want to do this job that I'm applying for. You have to show why you're a good fit for that job, because that's space that needs to go to marketing yourself. Um, Non-relevant information, thinking about keywords, branding, uh, resume real estate. Non-relevant information is oftentimes a killer for people who are trying to switch careers or get to a position um, that they really desire. So, for example, if I'm a sales professional and I'm looking to be a sales manager, maybe I have a quarter of my page space on the resume to my time as a chef or as an engineer. You certainly had that experience, and it's not that it's not valuable, but certainly there's other parts of your background that could be more directly relevant for that position. So um, the resume in general should cascade. You should have the most recent position taking up the majority of the space. But in instances where you're trying to switch careers, or in instances where you're trying to maybe go back to a job that you've done in years past versus what you've done most recently, you should let the space on the resume reflect that. Put more content in there saying, yeah, I did engineering 10 years ago and I've done sales for the last 2 years. I really want to be able to go back into engineering, and so the engineering is what should take up the majority of the space on the resume, because again, we want to get those keyword terms in there, and it's all about branding yourself effectively and marketing yourself specifically for each position. uh, I mentioned this before. From a competitive standpoint, you will want to focus on the accomplishments versus the actual responsibilities of each job. And then while it sounds silly, we still find ourselves needing to say it, but we come across extremely often resumes that aren't formatted well and that do have typos in them. So, and this is oftentimes people who say, "Oh, I'm a good writer. I've proofread this 2 or 3 times." If you're not going to have a professional look it over, or a recruiter look at the resume, you should at the very least have a peer look over the resume and just read it word for word. You obviously know you best, and you know what content you bring to the table. Uh, but we are not writing the resume for ourselves. We're writing the resume for others who are going to be reading it. So another person should read it before you submit it. This is your dream job that you're going for. Don't let something silly like a spelling mistake or weird grammar get you ruled out, because when recruiters are looking through a stack of resumes, they will find any reason they can to not call you, or any reason they can to reject you. So take the time to make sure that thing is proofread as well as possible. And then keeping it up to date. This is important too. We've gotten cases before where we've worked with executives whom they've been at the same company for 25, 30 years, which is great, and they've never needed a resume. But then something happens where they need to be moving on to a new job, or they decided that they want to shift careers and do something different, and then they come to us and say, I don't remember these numbers, or I don't remember these big wins. And we work around that. We still create a competitive document, but you really want to keep this updated throughout your career, and you really want to keep track of the process improvements you've had, the cost savings, and the big wins, because in a tumultuous job market, that anything could happen. When you walk into work, with regards to your job, if you are up for a promotion, or maybe unfortunately if you get laid off, or maybe there's a pandemic that comes and affects everyone's organization, you're going to want to have this up to date. So we always recommend keeping track, at bare minimum, just the notes on the major wins and the accomplishments that you've had. And then it pays off because you stay motivated and you stay curious about enhancing each company that you've been a part of. And if you're performing well at your current organization, that opens up opportunities both internally and externally, obviously, for you. So Um, and then two, just working in the industry and you have a recruiter reach out to you, that can happen all the time. And so having something that is ready to go for an opportunity that you do really want, that's going to be a vital tool for you. So when we do evaluations, we're looking at five main things: the summary, the content, the SEO and keyword value, just from a stylistic standpoint as well, how it's formatted, and then the word count. So we've kind of touched on all those so far. And then moving away from the resume a bit, just general job search advice. Uh, the first really group of people you should always look to is your own personal network. Oftentimes, people can give you an inside track on not even a job, but a certain industry that's emerging or a certain company that is in demand of a certain kind of talent. Uh, if you are starting an active job search, go ahead and reach out to those personal connections, or maybe there's people on LinkedIn who you've seen their content posted before and they've exhibited subject matter expertise, and you could send them a message saying, hey, you look like you know a ton about aerospace, and I've been trying to break into aerospace for years. How did you get to be where you are? Could we talk for a bit? Uh, the idea here is that it's not like you're really asking them for a job more often than not, like directly saying, hey, do you have any job postings? Or do you have any openings? But just asking them for advice oftentimes will open up the doors on a variety of possibilities. And then, more often than not, I think you'd be surprised is that people are willing to share their subject matter expertise, and they're willing to help, because that's what social networking is all about. And so just try to start conversations with people. There's two things that are bad that could happen. The very worst that can happen is they say, not interested, or they just don't respond. So that's the very worst thing that can happen. So you really have nothing to lose. You just got to put your feelers out there. And then something too to consider is connecting with alumni. Just like talking to anyone outside of a professional setting, making new friends, whatever that may be. You want to find some kind of commonality with them. So maybe a certain company or industry that you've had an interest in hires a bunch of Spartans from MSU. Uh, that can be your in terms of starting that conversation and seeing, you know, checking in with alumni and seeing what they're up to. And then schools as well, oftentimes will have alumni networks where you can interact and get the inside track on certain opportunities that are out there. So I know several schools out there will host alumni events, and I know different organizations will hold career fairs. Uh, the point of what we're going to see over these next few slides are that if you want to make the most out of your job search, you really got to do a multifaceted strategy. Don't just use the job boards, don't just use LinkedIn, don't just connect with your personal network and alumni, and don't just go to networking events. You should do all of that, because you never know what opportunities you can be missing out on unless you're looking for them. And then just making the most out of your LinkedIn profile. We have an example of a very successful profile on here. There's a very reliable statistic out there that um, there's over 500 million users on LinkedIn, and there's someone that joins every 2 seconds. And that actually hiring professionals, 75% of their hiring departments require them to research a potential candidate online before deciding whether or not to reach out to them. So, what that means is if you apply to an organization, there's almost a guaranteed chance. Again, 75% are required, so it doesn't include the 25 that just could do it on their own volition. But there's a 75% requirement that they're going to Google you. They're going to look you up online and say, I have to see if this person is on the grid, see how this person represents themselves online before moving forward in their application and having them join our organization. So what does that mean? You gotta brand yourself well, and you gotta have a LinkedIn profile that really maximizes how you show your skill sets and can really show how you bring your different experiences to the table. Get endorsements. You should show your all of your qualifications, your interests, and really do your best to connect with people on LinkedIn because it really has become a vital tool on the job market. And then the job boards too. The nice thing about job boards, and I tell a lot of our candidates this, is that they are great resources because companies will oftentimes choose them because they're frankly a little bit less expensive than to hire a full-time recruiter to look for talent. So a company, they might be looking to add to their sales team or their engineering team, so they'll litter these job boards with different postings and they'll check them. And so if you have a resume that you can send in that matches the keywords and requirements of the posting that's out there, you should by all means use and explore these different job boards. And the nice thing about it is that it's quick, and not only can you actively apply for positions, but you can passively just have your resume out there, and keep it updated because that also factors into how job boards rank your resume. And so if you don't want your resume to end up at the bottom of the stack, or if you don't want it to be um, looked over, you'll want to keep making adjustments and applying and using the website actively. And then too, just last thing, our recruiters. A lot of times, recruiters are working on behalf of businesses and filling their talent needs. But having your resume in their database is going to help you again get that inside track. So I can tell you, recruiters, whatever organization they come from, they're always going to check their own database first because that's low hanging fruit for them. They're candidates they know, they're people they've talked to, and so if they get hired to fill a certain job posting and they got to do it fast, they're going to check on people they've communicated with in the past. So um, if you have your resume in their database, and you contact them, there's a good chance they might not have something for you right away. But in the future, if there's a posting that comes across their desk, you'll have made that contact with them. You'll be in their database, and they'll think of you when they need to fill that posting. So, and this is yet another nothing to lose strategy about the job search. It's gonna, cost you $0 to reach out to a recruiter and send them your resume. So, another thing to just explore and take advantage of. And then too, I know I've harped on this quite a bit throughout the presentation thus far. But if you don't really understand the technology, and if you don't make the most of the technical resources that are offered and are relied on by a lot of organizations and job boards, you are going to be behind in the job search. There will be candidates whom might be less qualified for the position than you, but will get considered first because they understand technology a bit better. They understand keywords better, and their information is going to be more prevalent and more visible. So I always stress that we will get clients who will say, "Hey, I'm not a big social media person," or "Oh, I hate Facebook. Why would I get a LinkedIn?" And I get that, and I definitely understand that, but uh, you know it's a competition when you're looking for a job. You have to beat out other candidates, and you do have to market yourself. And there's 500 million candidates on LinkedIn, and 3/4 of hiring departments are required to look you up online. So you have to represent yourself well, and you have to take advantage of those resources. And this just goes back to the idea of the job search is not so much about you as much as it is about what others are looking for and how you can fit yourself into that mold and into that opportunity. And so, this is another point to bring up as well, is that sometimes having less is more. So I always tell professionals and uh, different clients we've had that we would rather, as a candidate starting a successful job search, you'd rather have 5 or 6 super tailored resumes and cover letters and make sure your resume is up to date. You'd rather do that really intensely 5 times instead of sending out 25 of the same resume untailored, and non-specific to the opportunity. Um, so it should be 1 to 2 pages. It shouldn't really be longer than that, and it should be top heavy and optimized for the position that you're going for. And then I mentioned earlier that recruiters are busy. They're recruiting for multiple positions. Hiring managers, uh, occasionally will have responsibilities outside of just recruiting for your job post. So they're not always going to give you feedback in a timely manner or at all. uh, it can be frustrating to where you're applying around and maybe you're desperate for a new job and maybe you're really looking to transition out of your current job and no one's getting back with you. You can't wait to hear feedback. And I would even take it a step further. Even if you have an offer that's coming and you really like the company and, maybe it's been a great interview process all throughout, our career coaches would still advise you to continue your job search and continue exploring your opportunities. We have heard the horror stories out there where companies will rescind offers even days before you're supposed to start, and so uh, just like anything else in life, you'll always want to have a backup plan and continue those conversations. Uh, and so if you're making your job search contingent on feedback of another professional who has more responsibilities and more things to focus on than just that one job, it's a losing strategy. Um, so it is difficult. And then I would say too, you can't even always expect honest feedback if they give you any feedback. You just have to try to utilize your different resources and continue marketing yourself as well as possible for each position. Uh, and and that's the thing too, is you do want to be strategic about this. A job search is a strategy that you put into place. Um, and so instead of saying, and I mentioned this before, you don't just want to do one thing. You don't just want to send out the resume. You don't just want to network and talk to your personal network. You really want to put yourself out there as well as possible so you can get the lay of the land. That's open opportunities out there. Really understand the kinds of roles that you'd be moving into, and B, so the opportunities that are out there can see you, and can see what you bring to the table. So you're going to want to really take advantage of everything that you can do in order to have an effective job search. And don't procrastinate as well. this is a this I told this stat to someone just yesterday on the phone, and the guy said, "Wow, that blows my mind." It's that 50% of successful new hires that get placed into the role have applied to that position within the first week of it being posted. Meaning, if they posted a job on Wednesday, there's a very good chance, a 50% chance that the candidate has applied Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. So very good chance, and then an even greater chance that they've applied within the first 2 weeks, so the following week as well. What does that mean? It means you got to be vigilant, and you got to be looking at job postings that are hot off the press. The reason for this, again, is companies, if they put something out there, they obviously have a need for it right away. And just like a lot of other things in life, the early bird gets the worm. And you'll want to make sure that you can get your application in there, again, tailored and in focus for the position. But you want to make sure it gets in there fast, because I can pretty much guarantee you there's several job postings out there that companies have that they might not even know that they have. I'm sure several companies have live postings on Indeed from 2015 that that they're not even looking at, and then B are postings that they may already have a candidate selected for. So you always got to be looking at when things are posted and really hopping on them when you do send your resume to those organizations. And then two, it's important to research companies themselves. If you think about the uh, the talent and the kind of candidate that an organization wants to bring in, we always advise doing research into each company. There's a lot of times people have certain passions or certain corporate responsibilities that they really care about. We invite our clients to say, hey, you should really look into their social mission or their vision statement to see if it aligns with something that you're passionate about yourself. Maybe you find a lot of effectiveness applying to companies directly from their own website, and you have to dive into those different kinds of company web pages as well. It's something that you need to explore and need to exercise when you're starting an active job search. And then two, and usually this is often one of the more common questions we get is what happens when I have a gap in my career, or what happens when I haven't been working for 8 or 9 months. What do I put? Uh, it's better than the unexplained is to have some kind of explanation or some kind of role in that position. So even if it's not a traditional job, maybe it's volunteer work, or maybe you were a student during that time, and if you were a caregiver, or you did have a personal reason for being outside of work, it's okay to put that in there, because it's better than having a lapse in time on the resume, because like we talked about earlier in the presentation, they're going to want a cohesive timeline of your career tenure. So you want to make sure it's accounted for before you send that resume anywhere. And then general, just stay informed on different industry trends. For a lot of local job postings, this is a great thing as well. So employment boosts you saw were out of Metro Detroit, and a big piece of news and a big opportunity for a lot of people was when they opened up an Amazon distribution center in one of our Detroit suburbs, and that opened up a lot of job opportunities for people. If you're informed on local events like that, and pay attention to the news, different social media postings, that's another thing that you can use to really give yourself a sense of what career opportunities are out there. So especially in this kind of economy that has been heavily impacted, by a pandemic, there are still companies out there that are hiring. And even, up to 2 or 3 hours ago, I was getting notifications of people in my LinkedIn network that were starting new jobs. And so that's the goal of all of this, is that, yes, this is a situation that has impacted a lot of people. But if you're informed on what's out there, and you really put the time into researching not just companies, but industries, current events, and really putting that work in on the front end, it will pay off, and it will allow you to really make the most of looking for a new position. And then two, you'll want to think that, and I touched on this before, with regards to updating the resume and keeping things up to date. Software changes, skills change, relevant technology changes. So you will want to keep an eye out for new keyword terms, new trends. I know we've had plenty of clients over the past couple of years that have been really interested in getting their AWS certification and going for those positions, just because Amazon Web Services has developed into a very growing career field. Getting that certification, PMPs are a very valuable certification as well. You have to pay attention to the job requirements and the different trends that are popping up in the job market. And then, if it's a case of you taking an extra class, or paying for a certification so you become proficient in that new trend or that new skill, it pays off in the long run. And so that is something that you're going to want to do, because we're having this presentation to make yourself as marketable as possible for the job search. And the idea is that if you don't get the job you want it to be because you weren't qualified and not marketing yourself as well as possible, well, this is a way to actually get qualified for that job. It's just paying attention to what's relevant and what skill sets are going to help you get to the next level of your career. And how do we do that? How do we get experience without having that experience? How do we practice soft skills as well? There are so many different things you can do outside of just the traditional send your resume and wait to hear back that will enhance your skill set. You'll notice on this slide, reading books, taking care of yourself, budgeting things, taking on new, taking on new challenges and new tasks. These are oftentimes as well good things to talk about in an interview setting, and things to do just to develop yourself professionally. It's not really the, I see a job, I go for it, but this is beyond that, saying doing these things could help me move into a new job. Expanding my network, improving my skill set are going to be back end things that are going to help me get more opportunities. And then the very interesting slide here is just kind of a projection of how education impacts your long-term salary. So again, we're trying to come up with ways we can make ourselves more qualified. A lot of people during this time are furloughed or laid off, or actively looking for a new position. This is an opportunity to enhance those skill sets, or maybe take online classes or different kinds of certifications, because as you can tell, the more knowledge you procure, the more it pays off in the long run. And something else too is a lot of these resources are free. I know in this economically uncertain time, a lot of people are trying to save money. Harvard Business Review has 300 podcasts that are completely for free. Again, this is current event things, different industry trends, different ways of looking at not just the job search, but the economy in general. You can take classes on Coursera and get certified, and those are pretty inexpensive as well. Plenty of books out there, lots of MicroMasters certifications, and then LinkedIn's partnership with lynda.com, that there's a wide variety of different courses and certifications and different things you can learn from that website as well. So again, we're getting experience without actually needing to have that experience to attain that. So really sharpening our skill set outside of just sending out the resume. And then we're approaching the end, just having a little bit of interview practice here. Just like the preliminary part of the job search where you're tailoring the resume or you're doing your LinkedIn, you're really going to want to focus on the value that you can bring to a position in an interview setting. You'll want to research the company, right? You'll want to research the position, try to know as much as possible as you can about it before you go into the interview. You want to come off educated and informed, and if you do that, you're going to stick out as a result of that. Similar to what I mentioned earlier is that, instead of having 50, 60 interviews a week where you're going in there, and again, I know that's a gross over exaggeration, but instead of having a bunch of interviews that you don't prepare for, why not really focus on having a lower quantity of really well prepared for interviews and a well thought out kind of approach to when you're interacting with members of an organization that could potentially employ you. What does this mean? thank you letters that you send out after the interview, researching the people who are interviewing you, looking up the company's goals, their mission statements, coming up with questions as well about the organization, because it allows you to direct the interview towards value and how you can fit yourself into the organization. And if you can keep the conversation on those topics, value and how you fit into that value, then you're going to have a lot more success than you would keeping it on personal topics or things that might not be relevant for the position. So here's some tough questions that you're likely to encounter on an interview. Usually the big one is, why'd you leave your most recent position? Tell me about yourself is going to come up almost every time. And, what is your interest in these role? In this role, in this company, you'll want to keep these in mind and take a second to look them over real quickly. And then two, I had mentioned it before with regards to the resume summary, but you will want to have an elevator pitch set up and prepared. Make sure it's something that is practiced. Make sure, usually I've thought of the elevator pitch as a response to the tell me about yourself question. Something that I'm Ryan, I'm a sales manager with Employment Boost. I really enjoy working with clients and bringing them success and helping them direct their careers. In the future, I hope to sharpen my skill set within sales and also, lead a team of professionals who can consult with people in taking the next step in their careers. Again, kind of off the cuff and just using that as an example. But the nice thing is that if it's practiced and smooth and prepared for when you do get asked about yourself, it's, again, back to the idea of branding, presentation, and marketing. So having a good start, transition, and current situation that you're in. And then you think, too, you get strengths and weaknesses questions all the time. Performance reviews, they'll ask you about the same things every time. What have you done very well? What are you needing to improve on? Those are things to consider. And if you have answers prepared or things that you're prepared to talk about when you have that discussion, it makes the conversation a lot easier. Obviously, no one really wants to talk about their weaknesses or their areas of improvement. It's never an easy conversation to have, but if you can position it as a way of saying, hey, this is something that I didn't perform as well on, or this is a skill set that I need to do a lot better with, and here's what I'm doing to improve it, it changes that conversation a lot more. So this is something that you're going to want to think about, not just before appraisals or before interviews, but just about, when you're networking even. So it's a valuable thing to think about when you're out there marketing yourself and interacting with other candidates. And that concludes our presentation. I appreciate everyone joining and would be open to any questions. Feel free to just put them in the live chat box, and I'll be glad to address them. Okay, I think we're all set. I'm not seeing any questions coming through. Again, really appreciate everyone sitting in on this. Thanks again, and take care. Have a great rest of your week.